Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today we are speaking with Mr. Lew Rockwell about the state of the 2016 United States presidential race after the March 15 contests. Mr. Rockwell is the chairman and CEO of the Mises Institute and the editor of LewRockwell.com. He is the former editorial assistant to the late economist Ludwig von Mises and was previously congressional chief of staff to Congressman Ron Paul. You can follow his work on LewRockwell.com, Mises.org, and on his political theater blog at lewrockwell.com/political-theater. You can find him on Twitter at Lew Rockwell and on Facebook under the name Lew Rockwell. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/march-primaries. Lew, welcome to the show.
Well, great to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor. So let's just start out by talking about the significance of last night's results. Now, we're recording this on March 16th, so last night being March 15th, there were 6 contests on the Republican side and 5 contests on the Democratic side, and it appears that Trump and Clinton scored some major victories, and Rubio also dropped out. So what does all of this mean moving forward?
Well, it looks like Bernie's done. I wouldn't say that he's going to drop out. He certainly won't drop out as long as people are still giving him money. And he has hopes, I would guess, of getting some caucus states and maybe other states. But even without the super delegates, clearly Hillary is the choice, unfortunately. Plenty wrong with Bernie, but I guess I would take him over Hillary. But she's the one. In the Republican Party, of course, Trump did very well. Kasich got the majority in Ohio, his own state, where he's governor, where he's, for some inexplicable reason to me, a very popular governor. And otherwise, Trump took everything. And Cruz did very badly, and of course Rubio did very badly and also dropped out, as you note. So I think that's good. It's good to be rid of Rubio. There was going to be I think one last debate, a Fox debate, and I was glad that Trump said he was busy that night. He was giving a speech, and they hadn't really notified him, given him any notice of this debate, and so he wasn't going to go. And then Kasich said that if Trump wasn't going to be there, he wasn't going to go. So I think Fox ended up canceling it. And Fox, I think, is a pretty negative influence in American life. So I was glad to see them deprived of some ratings and some income.
Yeah. Let's focus for a sec just on the GOP for now, and then we'll move to the Democrats a little bit later. So what is kind of your thesis for why Trump has done so well, and why is he so far ahead right now?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons to begin with. I think everybody, or certainly many Americans, are sick of political correctness, which seems to be getting worse and worse, going crazy on campuses, all kinds of, I would say, hysterical political correctness going on, intending to, because it's originally a Marxist phenomenon, and maybe it still is a Marxist phenomenon, but intended to promote left-wing goals and to suppress the speech of people whom they disagree with. They make no bones about that they want to silence anybody they disagree with. So the fact that he didn't go along, I think a lot of people appreciated that. Also, the immigration issue, probably because of what's happening in Germany and Angela Merkel opening the doors to millions of welfare refugees. I should say alleged political refugees, certainly people who want to go on welfare, mostly, interestingly enough, young males, young and unattached males, not families in what would be typically the case. When you think of refugees, you think of poor women and children in addition to the guy, or maybe not the guy, but that's not the case here. And I think just like people in Europe have been traumatized by what's going on, I think Americans are traumatized by what's going on here. They're importing, the government as a deliberate policy, is importing vast numbers of people with no discussion, right? There's never been a discussion of this, even though it's a very long-standing policy to actually change the American population into one the government and the power elite feel are more amenable, true or not, that's what I think what they think, more amenable to direction. And also they love wrecking the current culture. They love chaos, they love trouble, they love fighting, because they feel it strengthens the state and strengthens the people who live off the state. So Trump brought the whole thing up. It had never been able to be discussed. It was a death sentence. You were kicked out of polite society if you expressed even the slightest hesitation about whether really this was a good thing, even though it's many, as Hans Hermann Hoppe points out, it's an assault on the property rights of the people here. And at the very least, it ought to be a discussable issue. So Trump made it discussable. And so I think also the fact that he's sticking a finger in the eye of the establishment, I think people appreciate that. I think people, and we've seen polls over the last 10 or 12 years that show people more and more distrusting the government, more and more thinking that the government doesn't have their best interest at heart. Why the heck they would ever think that to begin with, I don't know, but apparently they did. He really has touched a nerve. Then, of course, there's his personality. I mean, he's I would say, an unbelievably brilliant politician, an unbelievably brilliant media guy. It runs rings around them all. And he's a very, very smart guy. I would say he's not an intellectual, but he's definitely very, very smart businessman. And just what he's done in politics, and I think everybody assumes it's an off-the-cuff thing. I think that's not true. I think just as in his business life, this is in effect a business venture on his part. Everything's very well planned and very well thought out. But it's people, Americans, to give us credit, I think we're not the most envious people in the world. So when we see somebody who's successful, mega successful in the case of Trump, there are some societies where they want to hate you and kill you and tear you down. I don't think Americans admire success. They'd like to have some of that success, of course. So they see him as an admirable guy, nice family, just an impressive guy. He's taken on the whole power elite, and so far seems to have beaten them. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens if he's actually elected. My own feeling is, and I have a lot of disagreements with Donald Trump on the issues, but because he's not controlled by the usual gang of thieves, he's capable of doing something good. Whereas I think we're 100% sure that Hillary or Cruz or Kasich or Jeb Bush or any of the rest of these jokers we are guaranteed to never do anything good, guaranteed to only do bad things for property owners and for the people of the country. So I think that's basically, and also people have just sort of been waiting. They've been very, very upset with the gang in Washington. And we've seen indications of this, and of course the Republicans especially have time and time again said, just elect us and we're going to fix everything. Well, I know this will shock your listeners. Of course, they didn't fix anything. They just made everything worse. Increase the spending, increase the intervention, increase the surveillance, increase the wars. I also think and nobody can believe this, and I think this is a very healthy thing. And of course, Ron Paul laid so much of the groundwork for this. Trump he's not a systematic non-interventionist by any means, but he is the least interventionist, I would say, of any of these candidates, the 17 GOP candidates or the 3 original Democratic candidates. And in the fact that he doesn't like the Iraq war, he thought it was a mistake to invade Libya. He didn't want to invade Syria. And, of course, he wants to destroy ISIS, which my guess cannot be done by bombing and by the usual military means. I think there's other things would involve. First of all, the U.S. getting the heck out of the Middle East entirely would be the first step. But so he's ideologically a very interesting guy, and we'll see what happens. But I think a lot of people are just willing to roll the dice. They're sick and tired of what's going on. They're very unhappy. They're sick and tired of the lies and the corruption at the top. And they figure, well, maybe it takes a guy who knows all these people, knows how they operate, to stymie them. Maybe it won't work out. Maybe it will work out. But I think people definitely are ready to roll the dice. They're just sick and tired of everything that's happening. They want to change. They actually want hope and change, if I can copy Mr. Obama's slogan.
Well, and on Trump's foreign policy, it also seems like he's the least interventionist of the group on the Ukraine issue, on the Israel issue, and on North Korea as well.
That's true.
I want to move on to Ted Cruz, who seems to have emerged as the most successful anti-Trump figure, success in terms of winning primaries and caucuses and votes. He's been running as an anti-establishment candidate and as someone who is, quote unquote, a real conservative. But it seems like his career prior to running for the U.S. Senate doesn't really align with that. So what is Cruz's appeal, and what's the truth about this guy?
Well, first of all, he's very smart, very articulate. But the truth is his anti-establishment credentials are all a lie. He was a high official of the George W. Bush administration in Texas, the gubernatorial administration. He was a high official of the George W. Bush administration in Washington. His wife, a vice president of Goldman Sachs. He himself, when he decided to run for the Senate, got massive loans from Goldman Sachs and from Citibank that he did not declare on his forms as one is supposed to. He's an establishment guy. He decided, I think, early on that he was going to be anti-establishment, and the way to do that was to just give the wave or the hoo-ha to the guys in Washington. So he called Mitch McConnell a liar. Absolutely true, Mitch McConnell is a liar. And I think he was helped along in this, having all those people hate him because of, they say apparently he's extremely hateable in person. Trump impresses, I think, everybody as the kind of guy you'd love to have a cup of coffee or a drink with. He just seems endlessly interesting, and I can tell some stories about people who work for him and even people who've encountered him in private life and find him to be much more soft-spoken, very generous, just a nice guy. So nobody says that about Ted Cruz. Cruz is, plus I think he's got a slight bit of a problem. He looks like a vampire. I mean, all he needs is a set of fangs and maybe a little blood coming down his cheek, and he could go right into a movie. So I think that's a problem for him, but he does appeal to a lot of people. He speaks in the cadences of a Baptist minister. That appeals to a lot of people, and I must say not to me. But I think he's fooled a lot of people. I don't think he's telling the truth about a whole lot of things, but he's done well, and he's stayed in and been the most successful where all the other 15 or whatever the number is couldn't do it. So he obviously, just like his success in running for election to the Senate in Texas, nobody thought he could win. He won. And so he's obviously a very competent politician, too. That's not praise, by the way. So he knows how to fool people. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think he can get the requisite number of delegates, but either perhaps can Trump. We don't know. Trump may get them. He may not get them. So, of course, what they all want is, I notice what they're now calling an open convention with unbound delegate, either unbind all the delegates or keep Trump from getting a majority on the first 1 or 2 or 3 ballots. And then they hope to bring in Paul Ryan as the one they keep mentioning, who's a horrendous guy. I mean, I noticed he was endorsed by John Boehner the other day. And he's total establishment, total statist, total just for everything bad, all the wars and all the rest of it. And so whether they will be successful in this, I don't know. I do think I would love to see I grew up as a Republican, so I have a special hate for the Republican Party. I don't like the Democrats either, of course, but I'd love to see the Republican Party as it currently exists blown up. And I think if they do keep Trump from the nomination through the kinds of shenanigans, rule shenanigans, and other kinds of shenanigans they performed in 2012 against Ron Paul, then I think it's very possible that the Republican Party goes out of existence in at least its current state. So that would be just as much fun to me as Trump being elected president, which I think would also be fun. I don't exactly know what fun, but he can't be worse than Hillary. In fact, I think he would be significantly better. He's no Ron Paul, but who is? There's only one Ron Paul. Faced with Hillary, I think, and I think there's no question, by the way, all this talk about he can't be elected is baloney. What they fear is he can be elected. And just, as an example of Trump's smarts, he's done all this without any of the usual apparatus, because he didn't need to raise money because he's paying for his own campaign, which is a huge plus with people in this country, because they know the lobbyists and the special interests buy the politicians. So he's got that, but he just has a very small circle of 3 or 4 people. But basically, he's done the whole thing himself. He makes his own decisions, and he turns out to be a far better politician than any of the rest of them in terms of reaching people and convincing them that he's the guy. So we'll see what happens, but they're very much afraid he would win. I think he would be by far the most effective candidate against Hillary, not only because he would say things that others are unwilling to say, but just because he would set her back on her heels. I think in a lot of ways he wouldn't go along with the usual pieties. So they fear that. But even if he's blocked from the nomination, and I would guess it's too late to get on the ballot as an independent at that point. But I think that would be an explosion. I don't know what it would eventuate in, but it can't be worse than the present thing.
So here's a bit of a multi-pronged question for you. As Republican establishment donors have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on candidates who have already dropped out, what do you think is going to happen to that money? And also, what happens to Rubio's delegates? And could you explain a little bit? I know a lot in the media, and you just explained a little bit, we hear about the tricks with the convention rules. Can you explain a bit more in detail how those convention rules work? You don't have to go too much in detail, but just a little bit more into detail on how that works and how they could deny Trump the nomination, even if he did manage to get to the magic number of 1,237 delegates.
Well, I think just for example, they changed the famous Rule 40 to keep Ron Paul's name from being placed in nomination. He had a majority in 5 states, which was necessary at that point to be nominated, and they changed it to make it 8 states to keep him from being nominated, because it did not have a good effect. I don't know why and then they expected Ron to back Romney. Now, of course, there's no way in heck that Ron Paul would ever have backed Mitt Romney. Very bad man. But just from the normal, just at that stage of politics, usually they want everybody to come together and everybody plays nice and everybody gets a little something. But they just, stepped on Ron Paul and all the Ron Paulians. So that may be the reason that Romney lost. And I'm going to say he deserved to lose. On the other hand, Obama didn't deserve to win. So it's kind of tough to know what should have happened. But it's they can change the rules. They can, for now, as it stands right now, delegates are bound to vote for the person that they ran for on the first ballot. They can actually change that. They can say nobody's bound on the first ballot, and then of course they can use bribes and threats to get the delegates to change their vote, to make them offers they can't refuse. And these guys are very, very good at that sort of thing. And so there's all other kinds of things that they can do to try to make sure that Trump doesn't get it. On the other hand, again, I think that would blow up the Republican Party, which would be great as far as I'm concerned. But the Rules Committee just has huge power. I can remember, I don't remember, rather, I remember my father telling me at the 1952 Republican convention when Robert Taft, the great Robert Taft, the sort of Ron Paul of his time, not as good as Ron Paul, but still very good, great man of peace, and was blocked by Dwight Eisenhower and the evil Earl Warren, who was running the convention for him as governor of California and was rewarded with being made Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, where from whence he did much damage along with the other Eisenhower appointees. But what they did with Taft was they took enough of his states that he'd won, and they said these delegates were illegitimately elected, and we're putting these guys in instead. And according to the rules, they could actually do that. So they tossed out enough Taft delegates so he would come in second. So this is nothing new. I mean, corruption, of course, and theft, and stolen votes, and all that. It's as American as apple pie. I mean, it's always gone on. Whether they will be willing to be quite so open, quite so. I mean, I think even people who don't like Trump would be unhappy by that. So maybe it won't all happen. Maybe Trump will get the necessary delegates, but they've not given up. They've got all kinds of plans, and I think it's going to be a hot summer in Cleveland.
Well, and on the idea of them tossing out delegates, just this last convention, they tossed out the main delegation, and which was filled with Ron Paul supporters, and replaced it with pro Mitt Romney support delegation.
No, and in the state of Washington, at the Republican convention, the state Republican convention, the Ron Paul people had done very, very well, and the chairman just tossed out. He didn't replace them, but the counties that were strong for Ron Paul, he took a number of them and just tossed them out. He said, "You're not going to be seated. Get out. The police are going to escort you out."
Well, and I also
it's like the Communist Party or something.
Well, and I also think it's worth noting. All of a sudden, they've pointed out that maybe in Alabama the delegates are bound on the first ballot, but they're already saying in Pennsylvania they're not. And of course, that's a state that Trump is likely to win and has a lot of delegates. And I've also seen Ben Ginsburg, who's been a longtime GOP attorney. I've seen him on MSNBC bragging about how they stole delegates from Ron Paul and manipulated that process.
He's actually the Svengali behind the whole rules manipulation the last time. And I'm sure he'll be involved this time. And there's just infinite things they can do with the rules. But, of course, things haven't been watched on television and social media and everything, anything like they are this time. So we'll just have to see. But these people certainly are capable of there was a high Republican Party official today who is convening a meeting this week, another one of these Stop Trump meetings. And he said, really, the way it ought to be is the RNC picks the nominee, not the voters. And so, of course, that's the way they feel. I mean, that it should all be just the lobbyists and the big donors. By the way, another great aspect of the whole Trump business has been he's wiped out the consultant class, the donor class. I mean, all these regular candidates have scads of multi-million-dollar consultants telling them what to do. And of course, they have these huge donors giving money to super PACs. And I was interested to see, just a couple of months ago, Charles Koch in an interview sort of saying, "Poor little me, it's just terrible. I've spent all this money and I have no influence." Well, okay, Charles, yeah, maybe you should go back to drilling for oil. So that's these guys who think they can, buy up everything. Turns out not to be true. Now, it might be true again after Trump, but I think I think really he's had a revolutionary effect on the whole Republican Party already, and all these lobbyists and the consultants who all have a huge amount of money, power, prestige, to lose, of course, want to get rid of him. So, the battle's not over. All I can say for sure is it's been very, very interesting and fun. It's going to continue to be interesting and fun.
So before we move on to the Democratic contest, you mentioned that the upcoming Salt Lake City debate has been canceled. So I assume that means that we're done with these GOP primary debates. So what did these debates accomplish? I suppose Rubio collapsed in New Hampshire thanks to Chris Christie, and Jeb was exposed. Yeah. But what have been some of the main points of these primary debates?
I don't know. Of course, first of all, they're not debates. I mean, a debate is between two people under certain rules, and they're the ones talking. There's no such thing as an alleged moderator or moderators coming up with gotcha questions and making themselves the star of the show. So there are no Megyn Kellys, for example, in a regular debate. And you certainly can't have how many, were there like 15 people in those early debates, so-called debates? Anyway, it was just, or maybe they had the undercard debate, or maybe there were 12 or something, and then 5 in the undercard. It was all just crazy. So I'm sure that if somebody else were running those things, they would find a way to have smaller groups. I always thought the so-called undercard debates were actually more interesting because the moderators were not running the show. They were not making themselves the stars. And the guys got to speak more, and of course, to go after each other too. It was more. These are not strictly debates either, but they were more like a debate. So I think you're right. I mean, it helped winnow the field. That was good. I mean, it was so many people. Most of them eminently deserved to be kicked out, and of course, it was. Another thing that I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Trump over, he destroyed the Bush family. I mean, he destroyed Jeb Bush, who was going to be the president. They all thought so. He was going to bring back the Bush administration, and Trump just wiped the floor with him. And it was like just as an afterthought. So it was quite a wonderful thing to see. And I think it's no coincidence that at one of the recent debates, the one in Houston, where George and Barbara Bush were attending, and George H.W. was caught on camera giving, talk about a look that could kill, looking at Trump as he's speaking and making a slit-the-throat motion. And since this guy was head of the CIA and undoubtedly has participated in assassinations, maybe a number of assassinations. There's some evidence he was involved even in the Kennedy assassination as a young CIA agent. I thought, I mean, that's not just some random guy doing that, but it was a look of real hate. And so to have earned that from this paladin of the power elite, that should be a medal on Trump's chest.
So let's move on to the Democratic side now. It really looks at this point, like you said, that Bernie really has no chance. But we do still hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, Sanders can still come back." Is there any possibility for that, or is it all
sure
done?
if she's indicted? And I know Judge Napolitano, for example, thinks that it's probably going to happen. I hope. From his lips to God's ear is all I can say, because that would be tremendous fun. And I'm not for anybody being indicted on such, what in the private sector would be a non-crime, but somebody who's themselves a person responsible for the murders of so many depredations, so much oppression as Hillary Clinton. Absolutely, indict her and send her to the big house, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you think that anyone else would jump in, like Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, if Hillary just disappeared?
I think it's Bernie is not for the Democrats quite like Trump is for the Republicans, but they don't like Bernie. He's an outsider. He's a populist figure. He's definitely a left populist rather than a right populist. He's a champion of more statism, more socialism. much higher taxes, much bigger government. He's not a man of peace. Now, it's true he voted against the Iraq war, but he's been for all the Obama wars and all the Obama military spending and so forth. So he turns out to be like so many of these pro-peace people on the left against Republican wars, but all for Democratic wars. So it's just, he's a fraud on the peace issue. But he definitely is. Is he more of a statist than the others? I think probably not. He's just more open about it. The Democrats, and for that matter, the Republicans, tend to hide just how virulent their statism is. But he's not one of the gang, Bernie. They all want Hillary. And so absolutely there would be people brought in, whether it would be Biden, Warren, a Biden-Warren ticket I've heard talk of in order to stop him if that had become necessary, but it doesn't look like it's necessary. So I don't believe he can get the delegates. And even if he could, she's got all the super delegates who are these Democratic Party officials who, by virtue of their officialdom, are automatic delegates to the convention. So she's got 400 and, I'm sorry, I don't remember the number, 423, 433, something like that, backing her. Sanders has got, I think, 23. So with that kind of lead, it's politically, it's going to be un-PC, if we can use that phrase about anything about the Democrats, for them to nominate her by that margin alone, rather than the elected delegates. But I think that's not going to happen. I think she's going to get the delegates. She's doing very, very well. People like her. I don't understand it, but I don't understand why people like the vast majority of these politicians. So I think she is going to be the nominee. I don't think, I'm sorry to say, I don't think she's going to be indicted. My guess is that Obama would fire Comey, the FBI director, if he moved to do that, rather than, and Nixon did something similar, and of course was a crime of the century, and it was a bad thing. If Obama does it to protect Hillary, of course, it'll be a magnificent thing. So that's, I think won't be indicted. I don't think anybody can understand all this. It's like Benghazi. It's not a good issue because it's difficult to understand exactly what the heck was going on. And of course, in the Benghazi case, nobody wants to discuss the actual facts of the situation. Was that the U.S. was gun running. I mean, they were taking after they had Gaddafi killed and that anti-jihadist, anti-terrorist government overthrown, and of course bringing the terrorists to power, so-called terrorists. In that case, I would say the actual terrorists. Then they were taking all the arms that were then released from the government arsenals and funneling them to the Syrian Al-Qaeda that the U.S. is allied with. Some people think, and I think with good reason, the U.S. has something to do with the establishment of ISIS. They love this kind of, it's not just the U.S. empire, it's all empires. They love trouble. The Romans had a famous phrase about, divide and rule, divide et impera, and it means make trouble, and it's much easier to rule. That's what their policy is towards us internally, too, by the way. But that's definitely their foreign policy. So they wanted to make, to sell these arms, ship these arms for free, very, very advanced arms to the Syrian so-called rebels who want a jihadist government. Again, why nobody ever talks about the fact the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein. Of course, he's a bad guy. He was a politician, right? A head of state. But he was anti-jihadist, anti-Al-Qaeda, and all that stuff. And by getting rid of him, they opened up everything. So now there's ISIS. They got rid of Gaddafi, who also was that, and was also preventing the mass immigration that we've seen through Libya into Europe, into Italy and into Europe. And in fact, he predicted in a talk that if he were knocked out, the floodgates would be open into Europe, and I think there were people who wanted that to happen too. It's a great George Soros and other people who are helping fund some of this stuff. They want chaos, and the U.S. state wants chaos, the better to rule. So and then now they want to get rid of Assad. Assad's a bad guy. All these people are bad guys, but they're bad guys, very bad guys against him too. But he's always been like Saddam Hussein, like Gaddafi, a protector of minorities, so that Christians, for example, were not persecuted under them, and they were anti-jihadist. So why is it the U.S. targets as part of its war on terror against jihadism and Islamic radical Islamic terrorism, as they say? Why is it getting rid of the opponents of this? Well, because they want trouble. They actually want terrorism, and they want more terrorist incidents here in this country because it strengthens them. It shuts up opponents of surveillance and of the police state. And these, I know this won't shock your listeners. The U.S. government, like all governments, is composed of some very bad people. I mean, they really are nasty people, and of course that's why I'm an anarchist. I don't think government is actually reformable, although it can be cut down in size. I mean, that's the one reform that can happen, and that's a great public good if that could ever happen. We don't have, unfortunately, a good record of that in this country. It's been government expansion from the very beginning. So, we have to see what's going to happen, but U.S. is playing some very dirty and underhanded games. I started to talk about why but anyway, the whole Benghazi thing is very complicated. It's very difficult to understand. I know people make fun of Trump for talking. Somebody said he talks at a fifth grade level. Whatever level he's talking at, he knows how to appeal to people, and he knows how to say things that they understand and agree with. But Benghazi is not one of those issues either, by the way, is the email servers. It's not an issue that sort of grabs people and makes them want to say, hey, get rid of her, she's horrible. It doesn't have that effect. Maybe that's even why they pick issues like that, because, of course, the Republicans don't want to upset the apple cart. They're part of the gang. They're, as Butler Schaefer says, they're the two wings of the same bird of prey, the Democrats and the Republicans. So that's why libertarians need to concentrate on the bird of prey.
So going back to Bernie on the War and Peace issue, I just want to mention that there was a column Justin Raimondo wrote at antiwar.com several months ago that we'll link to, but he outlines how this has been going on for decades, and how Bernie's been a big supporter of the F-35 boondoggle because they've had a factory in Burlington, Vermont, and how he supported the Kosovo War. Yes. This is not limited to just the years of the Obama administration. And as for Hillary, it seems like there's been some recent reporting that suggests she was a big factor in the horrible tragedy in Waco. And also Gail Sheehy has mentioned that after the Monica Lewinsky scandal, Bill Clinton Hillary would not speak to Bill for several months until the opportunity to bomb Serbia came up. And then she was excited to talk to him.
No, and she was very bloodthirsty about Gaddafi, if you remember. She just was excited by murder. So I know some people compare her to Lady Macbeth. I think that's very unfair. Lady Macbeth just killed one person. She's killed, many, many thousands, and she'd like to kill more. So that's why they feel when they talk about her being suitable to be president, that's what they mean, to be a killer. Because in my view, we've had enough killing.
Yes, definitely. And I know you talked a little bit about this, but how do you think a Trump versus Hillary contest would look like? I know you were talking about how Trump uses social media really well, and I know that he said that he plans to use it extensively going forward. But are there any other big themes that you think we're going to see if that contest comes to be?
Well, for one thing, she can't, we know just a little bit when she accused him of misogyny a couple of months ago. And so he had one tweet and one Instagram, and the photograph in the Instagram was of Bill Cosby and Bill Clinton shaking hands and happy buddies. And he said something like, two of a kind. And that one Instagram and people's reaction to it dropped his popularity rating from 51% to 39% just overnight. So Trump, he knows what he's doing, and she won't accuse him of misogyny again. So he's going to take away from her a lot of the social tropes that she has, and I think a lot of what the left has to say about white privilege and that kind of thing becomes unusable against Trump, just because he's willing, unlike any other Republican, to fight back and to denounce that sort of stuff. So I think he takes away from her that, and she's got her her main deal is she's got huge experience. Well, that's of course not actually a plus to most people, that somebody has been involved in this stuff for so long and has committed so many crimes. And you're exactly right. She maybe even was the one who actually ordered the murder of all those people at Waco. And I can remember, by happenstance, I was in Atlanta at a restaurant when that happened, and they had the TV on. And the fire, when they sent in a tank to inject form of tear gas that's outlawed by the Geneva Convention for use in warfare, and they use that on these people, women and children, and of course men too, in this church and farm house, and they burned it down, and it's always instructed to me that the state, not that I'm telling you guys anything, the state never forgives. So I remember in the trials after Waco, the people who had survived but who were horribly burned, horribly disfigured, horribly crippled, very, very painfully crippled, the U.S. brought them to trial and sent them to prison for 20, 30 years. Wasn't enough they'd been just barely survived being burned horrendously. That's the state, right? As Nietzsche said, the cold, cruel monster. And it definitely is that. And Hillary is a cold, cruel monster. And we really, she's done a lot of damage, and it'd be sure nice to send her back to the Clinton Foundation or whatever before that shut down.
And it also seems like Trump would have a lot of appeal in the Rust Belt and in Florida and in a few other states that are typically won by Democratic candidates, and maybe be able to win those in a race versus Hillary. But I want to ask you, before we wrap up, about a couple of wild cards in this. The Michael Bloomberg wild card that everyone was anticipating didn't happen, but I've heard Jesse Ventura mention possibly running, and there's also all kinds of talk about a third-party bid being mounted by the Republican establishment and the neocons. So how would those wild cards affect the presidential race come the fall and the summer?
I think Bloomberg would have been a joke. He just is not. He's not appealing, and of course he's done a lot of bad stuff as mayor of New York. As to Jesse, I would love to see Jesse Ventura run. I think he's interested in the Libertarian Party nomination. My guess is the Libertarians would never nominate him, but that's too bad, because I think he would definitely bring attention and just increase interest in the Libertarian Party. He's a great guy. He's extremely articulate, great history, and sound on I would say the vast majority of issues. He's just terrific. So what kind of votes he could get, I don't know, but I would love to see him run. I always think the more candidates, the better. I don't think the neocons how are they going to do that at this stage? If you'd been preparing this for some time, they've set up, of course, as libertarians know, the ballot access laws are just horrific to keep anybody who's not a Democrat or a Republican out of an election. They don't want anybody else, and it's very, very difficult to get on the ballot. Can be done, but requires a lot of planning, a lot of money, and a lot of time. So maybe, a few $100 million and all the usual suspects behind such a thing. I noticed Bill Kristol talking about, his various people he'd like to see run this. Senator Sassa from Nebraska, who's a big Koch guy and a neocon, and Lynn Cheney. I don't know, but I don't. It seems to me very, very difficult to get attention and for just these people out of the blue that most Americans have never heard of. If they've heard of the name Cheney, they don't like it. They don't like her father, Dick. And so I think that's even worse than having a Bush last name. I don't, anything can happen if there's enough money. And I suppose it's even possible that they would get the state legislatures to immediately change all the ballot access laws for them and just get them on the ballot. But even that, the logistics of that, it's just very, very difficult. I don't think they can do it. So I think they'll call for, as Kristol and Robert Kagan and other neocons have already said, they'd like Hillary. And Hillary is a neocon. She's a left neocon versus a right neocon, but I must say that's not a big difference to the rest of us. And they would be very happy. In fact, it's why the idea of blowing up the GOP, which everybody realizes would make the chance of whoever they would parachute in there, Paul Ryan or whomever as the presidential candidate, he would have no chance whatsoever. But that's not actually a problem for them. In order to block Trump, they're happy to have Hillary reelected. And of course, for all the fundraisers and consultants and in the Beltway, maybe they actually benefit from having Hillary. It's a good way to leech more money out of naive people. So I don't think there's time. I may be proven wrong, but I just seems to me very difficult to come up with a third-party candidate at this point and get on sufficient ballots and then also get him sufficient attention. Very tough.
Kind of ironic that the system that they've helped to put in place is now working against them. But we've kept you well over time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And could you remind our listeners one last time where they can find more of your work?
Well, take a look at LewRockwell.com. That's LEW Rockwell.com. Also take a look at Mises.org. I'm chairman of the Mises Institute. You were nice enough to mention my Twitter and Facebook, Lew Rockwell in both cases. And thanks for having me on, and it's great to be able to talk to you guys. Thanks for the show you do, and thanks for having me as a guest.
Well,
anytime.
It's our pleasure. And I want to remind all of our listeners to go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/March-primaries. And that will be the place to go for this episode. And we'll link to all the resources we've discussed. And thank you very much, Lew, for joining us. And we'd love to talk to you again sometime.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes or subscribe on Stitcher. And check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.